Hello, I am Kat Rambo, and today I am interviewing one of my favorite ladies, Lee Martindale. We served together on the SIFWA board, which is the equivalent of kind of having endured hellish rowboat flagellation. I don't even know all the right adjectives for it, but we are co-warriors together in that battle. And one of the things I wanted to talk to Lee about today is you came to the convention scene about a decade and a half earlier than I did. You came kind of mid 90s. And I'm really curious about what the scene was like, uh, what I'm sure there wasn't an absolute dearth of women, but there was somewhat. But talk to us, give us some flavor of that convention scene.
Okay. My very first ever convention was in 1994 here in Dallas, uh, called Galaxicon. And there was a flu epidemic or something that year. I got a call from the con chair who knew me from the music venues. We used to do open mic together. Well, not as partners, but at the same events. She knew I could handle audiences, a lot of practice in that. Um, and she needed people to be on panels. My first story had just come out, and I went, okay, sounds like fun. What's a convention? I had no idea they existed. I'm a middle aged, I was 42 at the time, middle aged. I knew there was such a thing as fans. I had no idea they got together. So I showed up on their doorstep. Um, it was great fun. Uh, Back then, there were, as there are now, costumers, panels, readings, uh, concerts, mischief, and a lot of good, solid camaraderie. People were friendly. Um, there were no such thing as a stranger back then, or at least at this my first Dallas convention. So I showed up. I got signed in. I had a little guest badge, um, that said, and I had a program schedule. I went, I can do this. My very first panel, you mentioned uh, women in science fiction. My first panel was something on the order of why is it so hard for women in science fiction? At the table. Now I'm in my wheelchair at the end where it's usually more comfortable for me to get to. And down the row were 15 or 16 of the women writers in the area. Uh, that was my first meeting with Elizabeth Moon, who is now one of my best friends, and the captain of the Civil Musketeers. I have fenced the lady, she's deadly. Um, Nikki Curry Hoffman. I just, it was a who's who, and then her little first timer me on the end. The room was packed, standing room only. I think there were like three guys in it. The rest were women. Um, they were going down the table, giving their take, the first take on why is it so tough. They get to me. I stop. I start rattling off names. C.J. Cherry, Andre Norton, and just kept going. Even back to the times when we didn't know they were women, um, and it got very quiet. And heads on the panel were doing this. I thought I was dead. There was no back door. They were going to kill me. It turned into a very lively discussion. But there have always been women in science fiction and fantasy. Um, they're all on both sides of the editorial screen. And I got to the point where I just said, I am not doing that panel again
Yeah.
ever. Because after about the first 20 times over the course of the next few years, it just wasn't washing, if
Well,
that made any sense.
it's funny that it's both kind of like there have always been women in science fiction, but at the same time, there's always that panel too, because we keep seeing women getting kind of erased or sort of like shoved, kind of like they just their stuff doesn't seem to. I mean, we were mentioned like Andre Norton, C.J. Cherry for sure, but think of all the kind of like mid-tier people who just have vanished.
Um, the well, I don't see that panel anymore
Oh
on
yeah.
schedules. Um, I think it wore out its welcome because it was always kind of an iffy argument to begin with. Yes, it was there, but there were enough. Um, we had enough resources to go to that it wasn't like in the 30s, 40s.
Right, right, right.
Um, we could get in there and we could use names.
Would you do you feel like that panel in some ways ended up acting as a mixer for all the women at the convention?
It must have. It was kind of it was daunting as a first timer. Now you know me. I've been an activist all my life, and I have faced down hostile audiences before. So it was. I did. I have never bought into the sisterhood thing.
Oh yeah.
Um, because I've been on the 200 men and me job sites and that sort of thing. And so, but I was used to that sort of vibe. As a mixer, uh, three or four of the women and I still are still in touch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I don't think there was I don't think there was the networking uh,
Ah,
opportunity back then among women
yeah.
that there
Yeah.
is now.
Well, so that actually lets me segue into something I really wanted to hear you talk about, which is the fencing. You mentioned Elizabeth Moon, and so tell me the viewers, tell the viewers a little about how that came about and what it was, and just it's such a kind. I always wanted to have a documentary, a video documentary about it because I think it's just fascinating. Go ahead.
Okay, there were a group of women, three or four. Elizabeth Moon, and I frankly am blanking on who else, but some notable female writers who like to fence. And when we say fencing, we're talking épées, sabers, rapiers, long, sharp, pointy things. Um, the only time they saw each other was at Worldcon or some of the big regionals. And con-coms get a little petchy when there are women in the dark wee hours of the morning in the hallways of the hotel clanging steel. They needed an excuse. And they came up with, I think Elizabeth Moon was the chief instigator of putting together a group of, well, to begin with, women. We finally had some men, um, to put on demonstrations, fencing demonstrations. And we're not talking line fencing as in the Olympics. We're talking SCA style, in the round, with witty dialogue in between. And it was it usually had a backing story. I don't know when the first demo was. I joined the troupe in Chicago. This the first Chicago convention I went to, which is like somewhere in the early 2000s, as safety marshal. Now, I'm a paraplegic. I'm in a wheelchair. So that, people look at me and go, oh, she can't possibly fence, which a woman said at one demo. Elizabeth heard it. We were marching in as we usually do. At any rate, I became a full fencing member, as well as a lot of the time safety marshal. Nobody gets punctured on my watch. We would do demos for the conventions. We would sell booklets and other things as a fundraiser for the Civil Medical Fund. But mostly, it's an excuse to get together and climb steel.
That's so awesome. So one of the things that you call yourself a bard, which you are, and part of that is the harp, which is so important to you that in fact your website is Harp Haven. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you came to the harp, and also kind of like how the harp and how music and your writing are intertwined.
Ooh, good questions. Well, first of all, I'm still learning on harp. Um, I've had one for 20 years, but things keep getting in the way, like having to write and getting, my primary weapon, my primary instrument. I'll explain that when I get onto what a bard is. Um, Primary instrument is 12-string steel strung guitar, and I was a singer since high school. Played guitar since college. I'm a folkie, which means I'm a filky. I write and have recorded an album of original folk music, science fiction and fantasy based folk music. Um, when I say I'm a bard, I follow an old tradition in which I was trained, which is the traditional bard, which had many roles in society: historian, uh, advocate, judge, uh, record keeper, that sort of thing. Uh, there were three forms: poem, tune, and tale. Uh, and it was a religious office. Um, the Essentially lawgivers and historians is the primary, but entertainers as well. And some of those entertainments had teeth. I think my role as an activist comes naturally from that. But as it informs my writing, yes, I do. I have a couple of recurring characters who are bards. Uh, I have. I'm working on a novel um, with a modern bard as the lead character. Um, but it, I've got my job description, so to speak, and I, between the activism and my writing and my music, uh, that's how I've been acquitting him this lifetime. Heaven knows what I'll be doing next time.
Well, one way that activism has manifested during your time at SIFWA was you were one of the, I think, the main driving force behind the accessibility guidelines.
Well, it was kind of a vested interest.
Okay.
I had been to so many conventions, including SIFWA conventions, that were inaccessible. There were years when everybody else was on stage and I was moderating from the floor. There were times when I couldn't get into the green room or the hospitality suite or SIFWA's hospitality suite because of steps.
Oh, yeah.
And what did it for me was the year that Anne McCaffrey had been made Grandmaster, was being made Grandmaster. We were in a tiny boutique hotel again in Chicago, um, where the only way to get to the panel rooms and the main ceremonial rooms was up the through the kitchen and up the elevator, the service elevator. She wasn't happy, and because she and I were going up and down about the same time, I sort of started trying to make her laugh. When when they started seeing us rolling out of the elevator on the convention floor, with her laughing her head off, I had already gained something of a reputation as a troublemaker, and it suddenly started getting real. They 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 knew something was up, but that was the convention where I was furious as if over what they'd done to her. Me, I can make do, but they were making her grandmaster, and she's going up with yesterday's potatoes.
Yeah, yeah.
So when I was elected to the board, no surprised that out of me, um, and started working year one, putting that together, and pretty much fighting tooth and toenail. The year had passed. Um, there were folks who were a little more in the know on the board. Excuse me, and they understood, and I'd been pointing out, okay, this is a problem. This is a problem. What the hell were you thinking? This was a problem. Um, and I've always had a bent for writing procedurals and legal type stuff. Makes me dangerous. But it got passed. I actually got in 2019. I actually got the opportunity to see what it was like in action.
Nice.
The year I was awarded the Service to Civil Award. Steve Silver had been keeping an eye on the thing and making sure everything was right, and it was right.
Mhm.
We done good, and I just hope that it keeps going that way.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I think for me, that's one of the things that SIFA does that sort of really shapes the industry or shapes the scene is it provides resources like the accessibility guidelines, like all these, like the contracts, the model contracts, it's just like stuff that the
And
writers need.
GriefCom and all of the other things it does.
So
I'm
two
sorry,
questions.
I've got kind of a warm spot for GriefCom.
Uh, Two questions.
Well,
One is, just as a matter of curiosity, how long did it take from the moment you first said we should do accessibility guidelines to the point where they actually came up?
um,
I'm guessing 2 years.
more like 5.
Why?
It was before you became president.
Why did it take 5 years, Lee?
You don't want me.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. We'll leave.
A lot of it was having to educate them
Okay,
as to
okay. So,
why X was a problem.
well, so that kind of underscores the other question I have is like, so how many years? Remind me how many years, because I knew at one point how many years you were on the SIFWA board.
I was on the CIFO board for 6 years. I was with I was on GriefCom 6 years before I was on the board and 6 years after.
Perfect, perfect. Yes, and GriefCom, for people who don't know, is the SIFWA grievance committee. Lee, tell us what the grievance committee does. Excellent time for a
Um,
commercial about that.
okay, we get writers paid. We get writers what they are owed. I say we. I've had to step down because of health reasons, but it's still we in my head. Basically, if you're not getting paid the royalties you're due, or they're not keeping they're part of the contract. Uh, you try first, and if that doesn't work, um, we'll review your contract, we'll investigate, and then we start talking
Yeah. Yeah.
to the person who isn't doing what they're supposed to do. As to, I can't give any examples because what happens in GriefCom stays in GriefCom.
As we know, yes.
Which is actually one of our best bargaining points.
Yeah. Yeah.
They pay up, nobody ever does.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, as long as the writers get paid.
Yeah. Well, and
that's the important part.
Every once in a while, GriefCom gets to be a little more public about it, because like I'm the GriefCom rep on the Disney Must Pay effort, which got not just Foster, but a whole bunch of people paid, which was tremendous, I thought.
Yeah.
I can take no credit for that whatsoever. I came on after other people had done all the work.
Well, as long as they get paid, that's the important part.
Yeah, it really is. Well, which are you prouder of? Accessibility guidelines or GriefCom? Or some third entity?
That's a tough call.
That's a toughie. That's a
tough call. I can't make that call.
They're both noble efforts, right? They're both very worthy.
They're both good efforts. Both were intense.
Yeah.
And both, I think, do a lot of good.
I think so, absolutely, and continue to do good. So, is there anything about the accessibility guidelines that you'd like to revamp? Anything you'd change, or are they the thing that's come to your notice?
Nothing's come to my notice.
Okay.
I mean, things come up that can't be, the elevator, the little elevator up to the stage that some cons have, doesn't get delivered, or the ramp doesn't get delivered. Yeah. Things happen. Things can be worked around. Yeah. It's when the convention refuses to work around. That's when it's a problem.
Yeah.
I think the guidelines are as written are working pretty well.
They are.
Now, as a paraplegic, input with other disabilities or needs is going to have to be somebody else. I can't speak for a blind person because I'm not blind. I had some good input and references to go to when I wrote that thing, but there's always room for improvement on anything.
Yeah.
And if I would say that if you're a member of SIFWA and you run into something that they don't cover, that the guidelines don't cover, communicate, get with them. There is a diversity committee, or not a accessibility committee now.
Yes.
Contact them, tell them what you need, tell them why you need it, tell them why it's good.
Absolutely, and I'll stick the link to that in the notes in the video when I send it up.
Great.
Cool.
Thank you.
Well, what I could ask anything right now, right? Are you prepared for this next question?
Anything.
Just to go any direction. What are you working on right now?
Survival. I have been largely quarantined.
Oh, yeah.
Since this whole mess started, because of my health issues makes me more susceptible, and I have this fondness for living.
Go figure, right?
I don't think I've been out of the house in months. And then it's like doctor's appointments and things that cannot be done virtually or whatever. I've been in between working on taxes, that sort of thing, it being that time of year. I'm working on that novel.
Oh, nice.
I'm a short story slugger. I think in 5,000 words or less. 6,500 if I'm really cooking. So it's a whole different thing.
Nice.
I've only been working on this thing for 15, 20 years, but it's an exercise, and the story's in my head. I just got to get it on the page.
Awesome.
I'm also tinkering with some screenwriting.
Ooh, interesting. What sort of screenwriting?
Urban fantasy, I think.
Ooh,
I don't
cool.
know. I don't quite know what to call it.
Okay, fair enough.
Um,
Maybe you're creating your own genre. Heart fantasy.
I'll be dead before then. But as far as that goes, mostly I'm concentrating on staying alive and staying healthy. But I do get some work done now and again.
Fair enough answer. Does the novel have a title yet?
Yeah, but I'd rather not say.
Okay, that's totally valid. Totally valid. Okay. I'm going to wrap things up. Lee, or actually, Lee, I'll just do one more question. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you were like, boy, I was really hoping Kat would make me talk about, I don't know, catfish or gallbladders or, I don't know.
Please, not gallbladders. No, actually, you've covered the bases nicely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I was so excited when we had the Twitter exchange and I thought, oh, I get a chance to interview Lee. Why not? This will be
I'm
fun.
very pleased. You'll let me know when
Absolutely.
it posts. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm going to quit recording here.
Thank you, ma'am.